Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, March 25th, 2015, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pow on a Friday here. And obviously today our internet issues have sorted out. And for those of you who tuned in in middle of the show yesterday, the reason there was a replay, just as we were starting our show, our entire cable TV internet went down. Then it came back. We tried to go back to a live show. Then it went down again, and at that point we threw in the towel. And it turns out Time Warner was installing upgrades in our neighborhood. They're moving us onto fiber, and supposedly I now have double the bandwidth than I had before. But it would have been nice if they'd maybe said, hey, anybody going to be disrupted by our schedule at this point? But we're back today. The connection is solid, and we're good to go. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on him. Obviously, the big news story yesterday and today is the crash of Germanwings Flight 4U-9525 in the French Alps. And there are a lot of very odd aspects about this. Primarily that the aircraft went into, it departed its cruise altitude way too early and just headed down, straight line, until it ran smack into the mountain. Early reports that there was a distress call have now been denied. And everybody's out there. There's a lot of guessing going on out there. MSNBC was out there saying, oh, hackers brought it down. And there was another story that was being floated in the Daily Mail that there were witnesses who said there was an explosion in the air and smoke was trailing behind the plane before it crashed. Unfortunately, I can't get any confirmation for that story either. So I think a lot of people are out there just guessing, trying to fill air and column inches for their audience, as it were. Now, what we do know at this point, the flight path of this airline is well documented over at Flight Tracker 24's website, including the altitude. So we know the encoding altimeter on the transponder was working, so we can rule out massive onboard electrical failure, silencing the radios. At first it looked kind of unusual that the plane was flying well to the east of what would be a straight line between its departure point in Barcelona and its arrival in Dusseldorf, but as it turns out, Germanwings flies over French territory because Spain charges a much higher fee for transiting their airspace. So they're figuring out the lowest cost way to go, and so there's no mystery about where it was when it went down. One question that is not answered at this point is, when the flight departed its assigned cruise altitude, did air traffic control try and contact them for a reason? Was there a reply, or was that what led air traffic control to say, hey, we may have a problem here? Now, they have found one of the black boxes in the wreckage, the cockpit voice recorder, and they are getting good recordings off of it. They have not issued any statements about what the cockpit recordings are saying just yet. They found the case to the second digital flight recorder, but apparently it hit the ground so hard that it broke open, and they're still looking for the innards in the hope that it will still be some kind of usable data there. Now, interestingly enough, the White House has issued a statement almost within minutes of this plane going down, saying it was not connected with terrorism. I guess because the White House knows what's a terror attack and isn't, because they're signing all the paychecks for Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the rest of it. Now, getting on over to Europe, there are still ramifications of this march of U.S. military forces through Europe. And it is an intentional march, and the troops have been ordered to be on their best behavior dealing with the locals. It's a PR stunt, because otherwise they could have just put all of these weapons and trucks and all the soldiers on trains and just rolled them on through, and it wouldn't be a big stink. But a lot of these European governments are saying this is very obviously an attempt to condition the Europeans to seeing U.S. armed forces on the streets of their countries and not necessarily feel bad about it, other than it is an aiming point for the enemy in the presumptive World War III about to start. Now, over in Ukraine, George Soros is now openly admitting that the U.S. coup d'etat from a year ago, little over a year ago, has obviously failed. It did not achieve its aim of bringing all of Ukraine into the European/American sphere of influence and economics. And right now they're still raising on a busted flush. There are signs that the junta is beginning to tear itself apart, because the number of Ukrainian oligarchs has been dwindling as they whittle away at each other, and they're basically fighting each other like financial warlords. And we're down to basically Poroshenko, who is the installed dictator of Ukraine, and his arch rival, Igor Kolomoisky, who up until today was governor of one of the regions of Ukraine and was talking about breaking away. And so Poroshenko has been forced to, first of all, order all the regional governors to surrender their own military forces. That would be like Washington, D.C. telling the separate states you're no longer allowed to have a National Guard. And apparently this whole situation with Kolomoisky, he has now been relieved of his position as governor and maybe heading out of the country. And we know that some of the volunteer forces over in the eastern Ukraine have been recalled to Kiev, possibly to protect it, because we're hearing more and more discontent in western Ukraine, more and more talk about possible military coup d'etat against Kiev from their own military. Meanwhile, the European Union Parliament has approved another 1.8 billion euro loan to Ukraine, raising on a busted flush, throwing good money after bad. And it's definitely high risk, because we're looking at this article that came out of Russia today. So far, this year of war and conflict in Ukraine has basically destroyed 1/4 of the country's entire economy, between destroyed agricultural land, unreachable natural resources, and the loss of all those factories, the manufacturing in eastern Ukraine. And Ukraine couldn't pay its bills before, and certainly is not going to be able to pay all the new bills from all these new bailouts and loans that are being poured on in there to try and salvage what even Soros is now admitting is a deteriorating situation. Alrighty. Now, let's see, moving on here. Elections over in Moldova, in the Gagauzia region, are showing their citizens are looking to form a close relationship with Moscow. They want to leave the European Union sphere of influence and merge with Russia. And it's easy to see why. Everybody's looking at what all of those European nations, what's happened to them under the European Union and the European Central Bank. They're all in serious, serious trouble. They're all dealing with austerity, and the people are just being starved to keep the money junkies happy, and nobody wants to be a part of that. Now, over in Canada, the Harper government has just announced that they feel they have a right to bomb Syria because, after all, they have to go after ISIS. And Harper's out there saying that, yes, Canada's going to join the fray and drop bombs all over Syria's economic infrastructure under the claim that they're fighting ISIS. No, they're not. They're blowing up Syria's critical economic infrastructure as part of their now in its 4th year campaign to get Assad out of there and replace him with a U.S.-friendly puppet regime. Now, the other day we were talking about some very fiery rhetoric that was supposedly coming out of Iran, translated for us by memory, and Iran is now saying that Major General Qasem Soleimani didn't make any of those statements. It's all just more lies, fraud, and propaganda. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And I cannot listen to that song without remembering we went through an ugly period about 3 summers ago where we had drug-dealing, drug-making activity going on in both of our neighboring units, and cops couldn't do a thing about it. And finally, the people in that unit got arrested. And the good news is he turned his life around. Got himself clean, got his family back, and happy ending on that story. Other unit, the owner passed away, and it's being renovated for new neighbors over there. So Probably have somebody from the Secret Service move in there, keep an eye on Claire and Mike, because they're dangerous. Alrighty, now there's a big diplomatic stink going on over the fact that Israel was caught spying on the Iranian nuclear talks and providing that information to members of the United States Congress in order to undermine the P5+1 deal. And of course, Israel's already out there saying we don't spy on the United States. What a silly anti-Semitic Jew-hating thing for you to be saying, that we would spy on the United States. Really, John Boehner is out there saying that he's baffled by all these stories. How amazing that they would even think that Israel is spying and giving information. And Boehner and Graham are both denying that they were given any information by Israel with which to attack the P5+1 deal. But the fact of the matter is that Israel does spy on everybody and does spy on the United States of America. And if you will remember, shortly before 9/11 happened, the FBI stumbled across the largest foreign spy operation in U.S. history being run by Israel inside the United States of America. And some of those spies are known as the dancing Israelis, who were cheering and high-fiving as the World Trade Towers collapsed. And in Carl Cameron's 4-part story on that Israeli spy ring, a U.S. official confirmed there was evidence linking Israeli spies to 9/11, but that was all classified by the U.S. government. And even before that, we had the AIPAC spy scandal, where they had a spy inside the Pentagon's Office of Special Projects that was sending information to AIPAC, which AIPAC then took and gave to Israel, and more importantly, and not discussed, Israel was sending manufactured information to frame Iraq and claim they had weapons of mass destruction through AIPAC into their agent inside the Pentagon, who would then simply forward it to the White House. And I have an article, flashback article, Israeli Spying, the Mother of All Scandals, where it goes back over all the times Israel has been caught spying on the United States of America, and how the U.S. government just gives them a get-out-of-jail-free card, just lets them go. And what's really interesting relating to the AIPAC scandal is the FBI had been investigating them for like 2 years for spying on the United States, and during that 2 years, members of the United States Congress continued to accept money from this spy organization for a foreign country. And that will tell you why they all stood and cheered and clapped when Netanyahu was out there saying, "Ignore the president, do what I tell you," before the United States Congress here. Now, we are getting to the point where a lot of the information that led up to the war in Iraq is finally being declassified. And there's a story over at yournewswire.com where the original 93-page document from the CIA that supposedly justified the U.S. attack on Iraq has now been fully declassified. There were excerpts and other things that had been released before, but this time the entire unredacted document, 93 pages, has been declassified and underscores the fact there was no justification. There was no evidence of weapons of mass destruction before the war started, and certainly they never found any while they were there. And that means that the United States engaged in an aggressive war against another country, and that is an international war crime. Has been ever since the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II, where it was declared under international law that aggressive war waged against another country is the ultimate war crime, and our government is guilty of that not once, but over and over and over again. And when you hear all of these people screaming about Iran's threat of nuclear weapons and they're going to do this and do that, go back and remember how you were being harangued by the government spokeslugs and the whore respondents and the prostitutes over at the corporate media that Iraq had nuclear weapons, they could destroy us in 45 minutes if we didn't attack them now. And just keep that in mind when you hear all these people screaming about Iran, 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 Iran. Now, the schism with Israel is beginning to open wide between the White House and Tel Aviv. The White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, has said that the crisis in U.S.-Israel relations is rooted in Palestine, and 50 years of illegal Israeli occupation, it is time for it to end. And the White House is now openly supporting J Street, which is a policy lobby in Washington, D.C., that is basically in favor of Palestinian statehood and just calming the situation in the Middle East down by simply saying it's time for Israel to grant to Palestine that which Israel demands for itself, recognition of a right to exist. And that's been the sticking point all along. Israel's attitude is, you must admit we have a right to exist, but we don't recognize your right to exist. And they're always saying Palestine must recognize our right to exist, and they're refusing. Well, Palestine, and in fact the rest of the Middle East, have made it very, very clear. They will all recognize Israel's right to exist exactly 1 second after Israel recognizes Palestine's right to exist. But Israel will not budge on the issue. We have that right, you don't. Now, over in Tunisia, there have been several recent terror attacks, including the use of unmarked aircraft, which should ring a bell for those of you who are students of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And not too surprisingly, Chris Bolin is out there asking if Netanyahu was behind these massacres in Tunis, trying to stir things up, trying to get justification for yet another U.S. military intervention in yet another country that has not actually done anything wrong to us. Meanwhile, the Syrian militants, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, have issued a videotaped congratulation for Netanyahu's election victory, and as a postscript are asking that Israel continue their support. So the question about whether Israel is supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria against Assad has now been answered, basically. Alrighty. Now then, when we come back from this next commercial break, more about Israel's minions in the United States, because they're now fully on display, and that's a good thing. They're being so obvious about it, it's now easy to spot them and recognize what it is they're doing. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Senator John McCain is out there saying that if Obama continues to back and support the creation of a state of Palestine through the United Nations, which is the executive branch is in charge of foreign policy, Congress has nothing to say about it, but McCain is saying Congress could vote to defund the United Nations, because the United States is principal backer of the United Nations. That's why it's located in New York. And so McCain is out there, once again, ignoring his own constituents in Arizona who've got their own problems to be dealing with right now, in order to go on out and literally threaten the White House that if they back the creation of a Palestinian state in the United Nations, that he, McCain, and the Congress will pass a bill revoking payment to the United Nations, and apparently presuming they have a veto-proof majority with which to do it. And I guess Arizona is a really great place to live, because everything is running so smoothly in Arizona. McCain has nothing better to do than pander to the will of the foreign leader. And I would wag my finger at the Arizona voters and chastise them for repeatedly voting this man back into office, but I suspect that we're seeing the work of the Diebold electronic voting machines. Diebold, we guarantee the results. Meanwhile, CPAC darling Dr. Lori Roth is out there on her radio show saying, if you oppose Netanyahu, you oppose God. So they're already out there saying, Netanyahu is God incarnate, you shouldn't oppose him. Well, this is one of those times where being an atheist really works in your favor, because, yeah, I'm going to oppose Netanyahu, and I'm not worried I'm going to get zotted with heavenly lightning or firebolts or anything like that. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Razor in Hawaii, aloha, welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Aloha, my friend.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
You are very accurate in your words.
Thank you.
Major kudos to you. I don't call very much. What we have them on is Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution.
Okay, let's back up here because we're dealing with speaker's occlusion. You know what you're talking about. I don't, and neither do our listeners. When you say we have them, who is them?
Those who break the Constitution.
Okay.
I've been up all night studying this issue, and it's about dual headers, and that's what you're talking about.
Okay.
And those guys were smart. They built it into the Constitution. It's in Article 1, Section 6. Believe me. It's true.
Okay.
We can't just fire at them and say treason, treason, treason. They don't appreciate court.
No, they don't. And the courts have gone over to the other side. In fact, we have a story we were going to talk about later where there's a trial regarding a misdemeanor in Ohio, and the judge has said that the defendant cannot bring up the Constitution or the constitutionality of the law under which he was charged because it'll just confuse the poor jury.
No, it won't.
No, it won't. But when we see the judges in our court system banishing the Constitution from legal proceedings, that tells you we're in a dictatorship.
I agree with your words. You're a very smart person.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yours. I just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news here. And yeah, I'm looking at this story. Judge Catherine Barber, was substituting in this court, and the defendant basically was out on the street, and he was shooting a video and using the video to solicit people to make charitable donations. And apparently he got arrested under the panhandling law for some reason, which is a misdemeanor, and they probably figured he'd pay the fine and go away and offend no longer, but he said, I want a trial, I want a jury trial, and I want to challenge the constitutionality of the panhandling law, and the judge simply said, no, you will not mention the Constitution here. This was a request from the prosecution. Don't let him bring in the Constitution or challenge the constitutionality of the law. It'll just confuse the jury, and the judge agreed, and that's a red warning sign. Now, getting on back to the situation with Israel. There's another article over in Press TV where apparently current and former American officials quoted in the Wall Street Journal that this latest spy scandal was part of Netanyahu's campaign to derail the P5+1 and open a door for war on Iran as long as American sons and daughters have to go fight it. And they're saying it's time for the United States to finally acknowledge that Israel is a nuclear power. It's rather pointless for them to go on pretending they don't know. Of course they know. Recently there were documents declassified showing the U.S. government was helping Israel develop hydrogen bombs. Of course they know. And I keep thinking back to that first press conference Obama had as president, where Helen Thomas just asked him a direct question. What nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama didn't answer it. He said, well, we view proliferation seriously, and blah, blah, blah. And he put on his tap shoes and he danced around. And the next day, Helen Thomas was banned from the White House press office. They know. And the difficulty, of course, for declaring that the United States government knows Israel is a nuclear-armed state is it instantly makes illegal every penny of your tax money given to Israel. Because under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act or the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the U.S. government to provide financial assistance to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that will not sign the IAEA or sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections, which is Israel. Now, there are provisions in the Symington Amendment and the Glenn Act where the president can sign a finding saying this nation is exempt, but presidents of the United States never did that because to do it would be to admit that they've known all along Israel had nuclear weapons. And so you, the U.S. taxpayer, are owed a refund for all that money taken from you and given to Israel. By some estimates, 10, 20 times what was spent on the Apollo Moon program. You are owed a refund on all that money. Now, Obama is out there saying that the U.S. will not rule out using the United Nations to create a state of Palestine. And he says at this point it is obvious bilateral talks between Palestine and Israel are going nowhere. Because Israel's attitude is Palestine cannot come into existence without our permission, and we don't have a reason to give permission right now. And this should be a reminder to Netanyahu. When you go into some other leader's country and you piss in his backyard, there will be ramifications. Now, over in Great Britain, members of Parliament have now publicly chastised BBC, which stands for Brits Buggering Children, over the very obvious bias in its reporting on the European Union. Because the BBC's editorial position is the European Union is good and sovereignty is bad. And members of Parliament are saying BBC is not fulfilling the requirement of its charter to be objective and unbiased in framing these issues for the British people. And as you know, BBC actually, there was that lawsuit in which the courts agreed. BBC obviously knew Building 7 was about to come down before it actually happened. More about the BBC when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the BBC has also come under severe criticism from both within and without the United Kingdom over its very obvious pro-Israel bias in its reporting about Israel and Palestine. And the BBC Director General Lord Hall has come on out and said, well, it's just really a difficult, it's tough. You don't know how tough it is trying to get information, and he's not addressing the issue that there is an obvious bias in favor of Israel over at the BBC. He's just trying to say, it's tough. Just leave us alone. No, we're not going to leave you alone. We're not going to leave alone any corporate media that is failing to accurately report the facts to the people of either Great Britain or the United States of America. Now, I don't know how the rules are set up in Great Britain, but the reason the American media has that First Amendment was to give them the freedom to criticize the government without fear of repercussions. And American media promotes itself still as the watchdog on government abuse, and they'll slap around some fringe politician for corruption, but they won't address the really big issues or the big lies. I'm still waiting for the American corporate media to apologize to the United States people for that whopper about Saddam's nuclear weapons. We still can't even get them to admit that human-caused global warming hasn't worked out the way they said it was going to 15 years ago. Institutional bias. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. The news wasn't saying Putin did this last airplane crash, huh?
I've sort of been waiting for them to say that. Yes. Get a picture of Putin there with a Stinger missile or something there in the French Alps, on his head skis or something.
Yeah, well, they can turn around and say the Russians hacked the plane, because they're kind of leaning on that on MSNBC.
Yeah, and MSNBC wonders why they don't have any more viewers anymore. By the way, have you seen the change in headline news, that second CNN channel, Headline News? They've gone away from running headline news, and now it's just all these little fluffy shows. They just sort of, headline news just kind of faded away.
I noticed, I noticed CNN and Fox News, they swap people back and forth.
Yeah, they do, and as long as they keep on doing that, it's not going to change anything, because trading liars with the other network is not going to get your audience back. When you start hiring people that report the actual facts of whatever you're reporting on, the audience is going to leave the independent media, because we're not as pretty as those talking head bimbos in the very short skirts, and they'll go back to the corporate media, and the corporate media will start making money again. But as long as they are the handmaiden for the lies, fraud, and deception coming out of corporations and government, they're going to continue to lose their audience.
Hey, Mike, the day of the plane crash, was the Spanish Prime Minister meeting with Angela Merkel or Hollande?
I do not know. And I have to be very honest right now, despite the claims made by MSNBC and this other one about smoke in the air, it does sound to me like this accident, as far as I can tell, something went wrong and the pilots didn't realize it, and air traffic control wasn't able to reach them to say, why are you losing altitude? When the L-1011 was first built, basically they had a system on there where if you touched the control yoke, the autopilot would disconnect, but there wasn't an audible warning. And one of the worst accidents with the L-1011, which earned it the nickname the Swamp Buggy, was they were taking off, I think it was Miami, if I recall, someplace in Florida, and the pilot accidentally brushed his control yoke, and the plane went out of autopilot, and the flight crew didn't realize it, and it just went into this very gentle descent until it plowed into the swamp. And this almost looks like a replay of that.
This just looks like a lot of, they said the damage is over 5. There's a lot of wreckage there. Instead of a plane just flying into an area and having vicinity damage, it's like such spread out.
Well, it pulverized itself. It smacked into an outcropping of granite. And these planes are not designed to maintain their structural integrity plowing into granite, or for that matter, wood and concrete and steel over at the Pentagon. They're going to shatter like a Christmas ornament, and that's exactly what happened here. I think the only blessing that we can consider at this point is that the passengers certainly did not suffer for any great length of time.
And I wanted to bring up, I don't know if you mentioned it a couple of days ago, they did that ICBM test.
Yes.
The United States, that was kind of like a saber rattle.
Yeah, I had problems with that one because the video that was put out was shot on film rather than video, which especially when you're dealing with a night launch, you get a much greater dynamic range on video. And I don't know, it just felt weird that they shot this thing on film. And it almost felt like they'd taken film from an earlier test and just decided to re-release it and say, see, we proved our missiles are flying and the rest of it. It just felt weird that they did that.
And I just want to say, look how unstable the stock market is.
Yeah, it was a bad day on the Dow. It's a good thing those buildings are air-conditioned on Wall Street. If they could open those windows, it would be raining stockbrokers right now.
Yep. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, as you probably already heard from the corporate media, President Obama, regretfully, has now halted the drawdown of U.S. troops in Afghanistan and says that they're going to keep the remaining force of approximately 9,000 in Afghanistan at least to the end of the year. Remember when Obama was campaigning back in 2008 where he was promising everybody the first thing he was going to do as president was end all these wars and bring all of our kids home? And then it was going to be over at the end of 2009, and then at the end of 2012, and now it's 2015, going into 2016, the forces are still there. And America's troops, your sons and daughters, are going to be stuck in Afghanistan as long as there is oil and opium to be gotten out of that country. Now, over in Yemen, major developments there. The Yemenite people apparently got close enough to the Yemen's president where he fled his palace in Aden for an undisclosed location. And now everybody's saying, we don't know where he is. It's kind of like Where's Wally with the head of state. And apparently also included airstrikes and against the presidential forces still guarding the palace. And so Yemen has basically gotten sick and tired of their U.S. puppet ruler, and they kicked him on out. So inevitably, of course, they're screaming, oh, ISIS must be in Yemen. ISIS is in Yemen. We've got to go in and we've got to attack ISIS in Yemen. And apparently, the Yemenite people have put a bounty on the head of Yemen's, I guess, now former president of $100,000. Meanwhile, apparently, Yemen army units allied with Ansarullah are now in control of the Aden International Airport. So I'm hoping the Yemenite president isn't thinking he's going to hop a commercial flight to Europe or someplace like that. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, responding to the collapse of U.S. puppet rule in Yemen, is now moving heavy arms to their border with Yemen. Troops, self-propelled artillery, howitzers, the big heavy stuff. So they're fortifying their border to make sure that this idea of kicking out U.S. puppet rulers doesn't spread into their own country. And it does seem to be a contagious phenomenon because now we're hearing down in Barbados, and I know we're going to get a call from John on this, Barbados is now saying in 2016, next year, they want to abandon their constitutional monarchy, headed by Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain, and become their own republic. And they're getting ready to hold a referendum on that as well. And Barbados is a very nice place. I've actually been there and had a very good time. Meanwhile, Great Britain, I guess, is trying to put out these little fires all over. They're going to spend an additional £280 million on revitalizing, renewing the defenses in the Falkland Islands. Remember that little kerfuffle they had over the Falkland Islands? Well, they're getting ready to do it again. Russia is questioning whether Britain really has a legitimate claim to those Falkland Islands. And as you know, Russia is making overtures to South American countries. Let's see, we've got John in Barbados, and John, you're going to have to talk fast because we're coming up on the news. Okay, John, I guess he's not there. I'm going to
I can hear you now.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to put you back on hold until after the news here because we've run out of time. So don't go away. I'll be back here in a few minutes. All right, we're going to take a news break. We'll be back with John in Barbados after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room handling the phone traffic, and we're going to go back to John in Barbados. And John, what's going on down there?
Right. I'm hoping, against hope, really, that we do get rid of the royal family and go into a republic, because if that happens, I will certainly be considering throwing me hat in the ring.
Well, good for you. And maybe you'll all start driving on the right side of the road for a difference down there. No, I'm joking because Barbados was the first place where I had to learn how to drive British style, and it took a little getting used to.
Yeah, well, there's the right side of the road, then there's the correct side of the road.
I see. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I've been looking at these. I think it was Investment Watchblog, Michael, that was talking about the European Union. And it looks like it's now more than 80% likely, in fact even higher, that Greece will exit the EU. But if that happens, not only will all these credit default swaps come due, but it looks like it'll create a domino effect in Spain, Portugal, Italy, and certainly Britain, because in the next election UKIP is looking very good.
Well, I'm sure they've already got those vote counters from Scotland heading down to London to take care of that.
Well, I don't know, because Mr. Cameron was making a speech to a group of old age pensioners, and they were shouting to, heckling the guy, calling him a liar and all sorts, and he looked really embarrassed because he was expecting to be able to convert all the old age people to the Tory party, which is pretty traditional in Britain. The older you get, the more conservative you become. But apparently it isn't working. Anyway, just another little aspect of this German wings aeroplane that went down, about the same time, and this is speculation, of course, about the same time the Large Hadron Collider had a huge magnetic failure in one of its magnetic cores. It had a complete short circuit on the magnet.
Yeah, I don't think they're necessarily related, because if the magnet had a short circuit, then it stops being a magnet.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But who knows what, an electromagnetic pulse maybe, but that's just speculation. I'm looking at what's happening in Iraq now, where it's becoming increasingly obvious that the reason the Iraqi army is doing quite so well against the ISIS is because the Iranians are in there giving them a hand.
Well, now the U.S. and the Iranians are having drills together. I mean, this whole idea, Iran is all of a sudden the good guys. and they're saying, oh, we've got, everybody's switching partners. It reminds me of that scene out of George Orwell's 1984. We've always been at war with East Asia. Oceania is our friend. And they're just swapping back and forth and hoping nobody will notice.
Yeah, I watched a speech by Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, and actually, if Angela Merkel had been there, she would have been hiding her face. He really hammered into Germany. So it looks like Greece is going to leave the EU, and that will put another feather in Putin's cap if it joins Russia.
Oh, there's no question that if Greece leaves the EU, they'll pivot to Russia because Russia is rolling out the red carpet, very favorable treatment, suspension of the food embargo, and of course Greece is looking at Russia's renegotiation of Cyprus debt under very favorable terms, and they're looking at the hard line they're getting from the ECB, which the ECB is constrained to because they can't cut any slack on Greece's debt without every other member nation of the EU demanding exactly the same thing. So they're stuck.
I mean, yeah, looking at Russia and its acquisition of huge quantities of gold, at least they know that whatever currency they receive will be backed by this huge quantity of gold. So I think Greece would be stupid if it didn't jump with Russia.
Yeah, I think they would be as well. I mean, all Russia, and for that matter China, have to do is announce that their currencies are now at least partly backed by gold. And it's goodbye to the dollar, because that's not backed by anything but the future slave labor of the American people, and there aren't enough American people to make good on all those treasury bonds already.
Well, I've heard murmurings that maybe the Federal Reserve and what have you are pivoting towards this new Asia Investment Bank.
It's more than murmurs. It's more than murmurs. I think the American financial system has finally come to the realization the days of dollar dominance in global trade are pretty much over, and they can destroy the world trying to bring it back, or they can just accept the new reality and move forward and try and find some other way to make themselves rich.
Well, I think if this pivot is reality, then the Third World War will go back a minute before midnight instead of advancing towards midnight.
Well, that's a consummation devoutly to be wished, and of course that's the reason I've been doing what I've been doing for 21 years, is to hold off that big mistake number 3 as much as possible.
Well, I'm hoping that this move by the American administration and the Federal Reserve to this new bank in China means that that third mistake will be put back somewhat.
Possibly, yes, but the wild card in all of this, or if you prefer another metaphor, the loose cannon on the deck remains Benjamin Netanyahu and his almost total control over the United States Congress. Because Netanyahu, he's just out there. He wants war with Iran. He wants to project Israeli economic and nuclear power across the globe. And he's got the U.S. Army with which to do it, courtesy of John McCain and Lindsey Graham and the rest of Israel's whores in the Congress.
I think that power is waning somewhat. It's the usual suspects that keep pushing this nonsense, but the rest of the Congress is now somewhat muted.
Well, they are, but they're still very much dependent on AIPAC financial support. They're still very much aware that Israel has tremendous influence over the American corporate media on which they are dependent for their reelection. And until we can break that part of the equation and bring the corporate media back to being objective and unbiased reporters on the facts, Israel still has a tremendous amount of undue influence in this country.
And my final point is in Ukraine, after the George Soros statement, and what looks like this new breakaway region, there appears to be troops from both sides heading towards Kiev. There's the private army. And it's looking pretty serious.
I would not rule out a coup d'etat that kicks Poroshenko out and just brings all this stuff down. And again, Soros is saying the U.S. coup d'etat in Kiev is failing, has failed. And just like the campaign to oust Assad. But the U.S. has perpetuated that agenda for going on 4 years, and I have no doubt that even if Poroshenko is brought down from power, the U.S. is going to continue trying to take control of Ukraine covertly, because this is a government that is institutionally unable and unwilling to ever admit mistake, error, or bad policy and change course. They simply won't do it. They never have. They won't back off on Obamacare, won't back off on human-caused global warming, and that ultimately may prove to be their greatest weakness. Thank you for the phone call, John. We got to let you go and take a few breaks for some commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives has voted 348 to 48 to arm Ukraine. That is a veto-proof majority. And as of now, the Senate is going to hold a symbolic vote on it tomorrow night in what's called the votorama, which is this little bit of theater the Senate goes through of just voting on all these various amendments, none of which have the force of law, but it's designed to get everybody on the record regarding their positions as everybody cranks up for the 2016 campaign season. But if there is a vote in the Senate, and it too is veto-proof, then the U.S. will be sending lethal weapons to Poroshenko in Kiev, and everybody across Europe and Russia is saying this is going to throw a hand grenade into an already volatile situation. And it could very well be that Ukraine is going to be the big bang that gets everybody to say, I guess we really are in a new world war. And I think everybody in the House of Representatives who voted to send lethal aid to Ukraine ought to be personally delivering it themselves to the front lines. Now, in the good old days, rulers who wanted war led their own troops into battle, and there was a natural reluctance to start wars for that very reason. Alexander led his own troops. Napoleon led his own troops. I think that was a good idea, because under our system, Congress and the White House sit safely in Washington, D.C. They got bunkers in the basement in case something goes wrong, and they send other people's children out to do the fighting for them. There is no natural restraint to start a war under the U.S. system, which may explain why we have had so many of them through the nation's history. And it may be coming to an end. Very interesting story up at Global Research in Canada. America's post-World War II global dominance has just ended. And it's something we've been talking about could very well be. I mean, coming out of World War II, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the policy in Washington, D.C., as expressed in the Project for the New American Century, is we're the world's superpower, we should act like it, and we're going to make all the world America. And the rest of the world really didn't want that. And now we're seeing supposed U.S. allies moving away from the U.S. politically and economically. And we're seeing this report where China, Japan, and South Korea have forged their own alliance over there in the Western Pacific. And it seems like the U.S. and NATO are rapidly becoming a toothless lion bellowing at the world that it can't get all the elks it used to. Now, there's another little piece of propaganda just came out. They had the one last week where ISIS had a list of U.S. soldiers they were going to kill, blah, blah. Now, apparently, ISIS, or an unreasonable facsimile thereof, have released a list of cities they will target here in the United States of America. And some of the cities don't make any sense whatsoever. Like Griffin, Georgia, and Bossier City, Louisiana, New Bern, North Carolina, Bonners Ferry, Idaho. And what this is they're trying to ramp up the sense of an immediate local threat. for the next false flag, because where 9/11 came up short is that if you were outside New York or New Jersey, it was something that happened far away. And they locked up all the air travel trying to maximize the psychological impact all across the American nation. But for people living out on the West Coast, certainly here in Hawaii, it was something that happened far, far away. Well, if they're going to do another false flag to get us all riled up and ready to go back to war, they have to convince everybody the threat is local to them. And I think that's the reason for this list of cities. They're spread all across America. The subtext is clear. ISIS is near you. They're in your town. They're in front of you. They're going to kill you personally. Be afraid. Booga, 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 booga. Because a lot of these cities on the list, and the whole list is linked to whatreallyhappened.com, they're not economically important. They're not strategically placed. They're not militarily important. It's just a list of names of towns across America to make all Americans think that ISIS is right there, just across the railroad tracks, just across the county line, coming to get you. Now, as you already heard from SRN and the corporate media, it was a bad day on the stock market. The Dow dropped almost 300 points. And what's really interesting is that for the first time, we're seeing a break in the traditional view where certain economic indicators get bad and the stock market goes up. Because today broke that pattern, and a lot of people are starting to scratch their head what's going on. So the market is definitely getting chaotic, and it's breaking loose from the control of the riggers. Meanwhile, another story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Major U.S. allies joined the Asia Investment Infrastructure Bank to establish a new world reserve currency. Nations the United States thought were always going to be loyal to the dollar are saying, well, we're going to hedge our bets. We're still trading with the dollar, but we want to have a lifeboat if the RMS dollar hits an iceberg and heads down, which seems to be imminent if it has not already happened. Another story over at Zero Hedge. Did de-dollarization just reach escape velocity? China's new Silk Road and Putin's Eurasian trade network. And they're talking about how all these alternative systems, BRICS, Shanghai Cooperative Group, all of them are now coming online. They have their own electronic international financial transactions clearinghouse. And that means the United States can no longer project foreign policy by the weaponization of the dollar or the SWIFT system. Because the parallel systems are out there and up and running. Meanwhile, Russia has now canceled the food embargo for Greece, Cyprus, and Hungary. Or will cancel it on the first part of April. And that's going to ease a lot of the pressure in there. And it's going to make those countries they're going to look at Russia a lot more favorably as a result of that. Now, George Soros is also out there saying that Greece is going down the drain. Soros is making a lot of these declarative statements. Ukrainian coup has failed. Greece is going down the drain. And Tsipras is out there saying Greece will implement our economic policies, meaning the ones they campaigned on and won the election with. They're about to tell the European Central Bank to go jump in a lake. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. A couple of developments. By the way, I stand corrected. Apparently, the city of Bossier City is where Barksdale Air Force Base is. Meanwhile, I got another email saying that over in Europe, public opinion is moving towards demanding U.S. occupying forces in Europe and Great Britain go back to the United States. We've been seeing this over in Japan, especially Okinawa. All these countries that are hosting these 800 U.S. bases around the world by which the American empire garrisons the conquered provinces, they're all saying, get out. We don't want you here anymore whatsoever. In response to that House vote to give lethal weapons to Kiev, the Russian Duma may reauthorize Putin to send the Russian army into Ukraine. So this thing has the potential to ramp up to be the start of World War III. And if it does, remember it was the House of Representatives that triggered this. And ultimately, before that, the U.S.-backed coup d'etat that drove the elected government of Ukraine out of power and installed a junta. Playing their little money junkie games, and they're running the risk of literally incinerating the surface of planet Earth over this stupid argument over whose brand of paper and ink everybody is supposed to use for the next 100 years. Now, over in Alexandria, Egypt, a quarter of the bakeries there have now gone on strike. And what it is they've literally run out of supplies because the Egyptian government subsidizes production of bread for the population, and that money has now stopped. And the bakers in Alexandria are saying, if we're not getting that money, we can't produce any more food. And that could trigger another major uprising in Egypt. Flip another government in and out. Meanwhile, over in Germany, Deutsche Bank is next up for investigation under the LIBOR rigging scandal. They're being investigated by the New York State over manipulating LIBOR, in addition to a separate U.S. Justice Department case. All of these so-called too big to fail, too big to jail financial institutions are massive criminal enterprises. And they get away with it because they're very, very generous campaign donors every election season. Now, over in France, they're now starting a crackdown on the use of cash, because after all, terrorists use cash. The Charlie Hebdo attackers used cash. And under the excuse of that, France is now saying that purchases above certain amounts cannot be made with cash anymore. You have to use some form of bank card so that you can be tracked what it is that you're buying by the government. And also, of course, it's just another way of forcing us to be dependent on those banks, because those cards aren't free. The bank makes money off of them. And so if you are being forced to buy everything that you're buying with that one of those cash cards, the bank makes money off of that. The bank doesn't make money off of cash other than the interest being charged on that fiat currency. They're trying to basically permanently enslave us to the banker culture as part of their New World Order. A lot of people are screaming about the new GOP budget. As you know, Washington, D.C. is once again mired in this whole issue over the debt ceiling. You know, should we raise the debt ceiling? Should we cut spending? And everybody's pounding on this false dichotomy. And apparently the GOP is trying to put a meat axe to social programs like Medicare. Got plenty of money for weapons. They just voted through to send more weapons to Ukraine here. Got lots of money for war and death and mayhem, and no money to take care of the American people. You're just going to have to get along, you know, as best you can without us, because our focus is World War III. And, of course, this issue of should we raise the debt ceiling or not is the wrong question to be asking. The right question is, when the Constitution authorizes the federal government to create and issue an interest-free currency, why does the government instead borrow that currency at interest from a privately owned central bank and dump the ruinous interest costs onto you, the American taxpayer? That's the question we all need to be asking. They don't want you to ask that. There's a big fight up in Canada over that very question, the Comer lawsuit. And the reason is private central banks write very generous campaign contribution checks every election so that the government will continue to sell you into the slavery of the private central bankers. That's it. There is still slavery in this country. Your slave chains are paper chains, in particular the 1040 form, but we're a slaved society, slaved to the money junkies. So let's talk about Ted Cruz, who's out there with his launch of his campaign, and he's drawing a lot of criticism. in particular for his vow to stand unapologetically with Israel. And he came out with this statement, if you will not stand with Israel and the Jews, then I will not stand with you. Fine, Ted, I don't want you standing next to me anyway because I value my wallet. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Ted Cruz launched his campaign with a speech at Liberty University that had a huge crowd in attendance, and it turns out they had to be there. This wasn't a speech where they said, Ted Cruz will be here, come if you'd like, because the speech was made during the convocation proceedings, which happen 3 times a week at Liberty University, and if you do not show up, you are fined. And so Ted was launching his campaign in front of a forced audience to make it look like he's got all kinds of support. Same stuff we were seeing with Mitt Romney back then as well. Now, fellow Texan John Cornyn isn't going to back Ted Cruz in the primary, says he's going to remain neutral. So Ted can't even get his fellow senator to come on board. By the way, IT people have noticed something very weird. Ted Cruz's new presidential campaign donation website shares a security certificate with NigerianPrince.com. I'm not sure if that means that if he loses the primary, he's going to move to Nigeria and become royalty, or somebody's just being very sloppy with his website. Meanwhile, over in Great Britain, there's a supermarket chain, Waitrose Markets, and they decided to launch with this Israel promotion where they had all these glossy things to hand out about the foods of Israel and the culture of Israel they were handing out, and there was apparently a huge backlash on Facebook and Twitter, and people just said, we're boycotting your market, and now Waitrose is trying to backpedal and regain their customer base, because there is this huge global backlash going on against Israel. And Ted Cruz had better pick up on it, because if he goes on saying, I stand with Israel, he'll get the Jewish vote and the Jewish money and the Jewish media support. But unless he's already planning on stealing the presidential election, I really do think 2016 is going to be the election in which Friend of Israel is a negative for the American voter. I certainly hope so. Now, about a week back, Obama was out there floating the idea of mandatory voting so that everybody in America, even if they weren't paying attention to the issues, would be forced to vote for somebody. That didn't fly too well. Now they're talking about lowering the voting age, trying to get in voters who will vote Democratic, which tends to be the young. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go back to the phones here, just finishing up on this voter thing, because the whole electoral process in the United States is being perverted away from the American people being in charge of their own country. And there was a very alarming article out of Investment Watchblog, Voter ID Simplified, making the point that this opposition to voter ID, coupled with open borders and amnesty for illegals, is leaving this nation wide open to massive non-citizenship voter fraud. And they're bringing these people across the border by the millions. And I don't think it was ever the intention of the founding fathers of the United States of America that internal politics of the United States be decided by a bunch of foreigners who were not citizens. And as I mentioned, now they're having abandoned the idea of mandatory voting. They want to lower the voting age because young people tend to vote liberal, Democrat. They're just trying to change the rules here. We've already got 12,509 illegal kids already over the border in the latest wave. Small-town America struggling to cope with all these new immigrants because they don't have jobs for them. They don't even have enough jobs for the legal American citizens. What are they thinking with all of this? All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Les in, I think it's Mississippi. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Michigan.
Oh, It's Wes from Michigan, from the Great White North here.
Yes. I understand it's going to be a little whiter this weekend.
Oh, we got white now. We got about 3 inches so far today.
Okay.
So much for spring.
Yeah.
But anyways, I was calling, I don't know if I'm dense here or something, but everybody's talking like Ted Cruz is a viable candidate for president. He's not an American. He wasn't born in this country. Why are people even talking about that this guy, from Canada can even go for president? What's going on here? Am I dense or what?
No. You're smarter than the other people you're listening to, because they just want to hop on Ted Cruz bandwagon, and we don't care if he's actually qualified to be president. He's our guy. He'll do what we tell him to do. He'll do what Israel tells him to do, and therefore you all have to support him. But you're absolutely right. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. His mother was an American citizen. His father is Cuban. They moved back to the United States of America, and Ted Cruz's father became a naturalized American, but that does not meet the meaning of a natural-born American being president. And again, as I mentioned the other day, the Founding Fathers put that requirement in the Constitution because they were aware of the history of Europe, of how royal families were swapping their children back and forth for marriages, and some countries in Europe wound up with kings and queens who couldn't even speak the local language. And because they didn't have an affinity for the nation they were ruling, they just went out there and played their little war and conquest games back and forth, and it turned Europe into a bloodbath. And they did not want that for the United States. So they did make a requirement. Now, they qualified it for those people who had been born before the United States existed. There was an exemption, obviously. But for the office of president, okay, you have to be a natural-born American citizen, and that means born in this country of American parents. Actually, I take that back. If you're born in the United States, your parents don't have to be citizens, but obviously it would help. But Ted Cruz is born in Canada. And, they've got all these legal people out there trying to explain away why human-caused global warming causes cold. No, I'm sorry. Let me back up on that. No, they're trying to explain how Ted Cruz could be born in Canada of an American mother and a Cuban father and still qualify to be president. And if you follow that reasoning to its absurd extreme, they're basically saying that if an American woman were to move to Russia or China, get married, have a child, and that child grows up in Russia or China and basically becomes indoctrinated with their view of the world and their view of the United States of America, then they move back to the United States of America. The child's father becomes a naturalized American citizen, and that qualifies him to be president. That is not the intention of the Founding Fathers. They wanted somebody in that Oval Office, in that White House, who was born here, who grew up in this country, the United States of America, had a natural affinity and affection and love for this country, not another. And that's why it really is absurd. But at this point, I'm willing to wager a plugged Turkish piaster that Ted Cruz isn't going to make it through the primary season because his standing with Israel is working against him. He can't even get the support of his own fellow senator in Texas. Now there's some information surfacing about his wife being involved with the Council of Foreign Relations in some of this nation building that's going on. And I think Cruz is going to be a flash in the pan. Huge scandal over the fact that everybody who was at his announcement speech was forced to be there. I don't think Ted's got the legs to make it through the primaries.
Yeah, it just boggles my mind because all the mainstream media is talking about it like this guy's got a real legitimacy to the presidency. And I'm going, well,
yeah, but the mainstream media told you Saddam.
Just saying, hey, it's a non-starting issue. Yeah, the guy is not from America,
Well, it's the same media that told you Saddam had nuclear weapons and humans are warming the planet and there's only 5.6 unemployment. So why are you believing anything they say about Ted Cruz? They're there to sell you the product, and in this case, the product is Ted Cruz. America.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is why can't they just come out and say the truth? I mean, if I was sitting behind one of those desks, I'd be going, Ted Cruz for president? No. And I'd throw the paper and say, give me something else here because I'm not even going to mention his name. He's not eligible.
Well, the reason is very simple. Ted Cruz is out there saying, I stand unapologetically with Israel. I will always support Israel. Israel has influence over the corporate media. and the corporate media is being told, you will support Ted Cruz because he's Israel's butt boy for the next White House.
Butt boy, but so is the media. I think they're all ankle grabbers myself.
Yeah, I think you're, especially over at BBC.
Okay, well, yeah, I just don't understand the logic behind it. I don't even know why they're even talking his name. He doesn't have legitimate.
There's no logic. It's propaganda. And they're going to keep on saying he's eligible, he's eligible, he's eligible, and they're going to keep on hammering this. They're already trying to link people who are questioning Ted Cruz's Canadian birth with the Obama birther scandal. They're already calling the people talking about Ted Cruz being from Canada, oh, they're just birthers. We've got to get rid of this birther nonsense. And they were wrong about Obama and they're wrong about Ted Cruz. No, they're not. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. I've already got a copy of his birth certificate.
Yeah. It should be a non-starter. It should be a non-issue. Nobody should even be covering this guy's name as far, I could see in the Senate, actually, if it was up to me, there wouldn't be anybody, no dual citizenship, no anybody from another country being in the Senate or the House or the presidency, because they all still have some love for the country they're originating from. I don't care.
That was the intention of the founding fathers here, and what really amazes me is how the GOP leadership is willing to hook their cart to Ted Cruz's horse on this issue, because if it does become a big stink, it basically reminds everybody the leadership of the two main parties is hopelessly corrupt. They're not obeying the law and the Constitution. And that is why we need these two parties to go away and be replaced with 5 or 6 new parties that are going to play by the rules.
Definitely. I'm kind of wondering what kind of can of worms is this going to open if he actually does become president? Because then that means that it opens the door. It doesn't matter where you come from. Now you can be the president of the United States, and your allegiance to this country isn't going to be what it should be. And, whatever they can do.
If they're going to say you don't have to be born in this country to be president, I think we ought to run Putin in 2020.
Yeah, there you go. We should put Putin in now. Put his name in the ring now for 2016. Let him be president of 2 countries. Then I'll tell you what, there'd be less fighting then, wouldn't there?
Yeah, there certainly would. There certainly would. All right, well, listen, I got to let you go. We're coming up on the news break. Thank you very much for the phone call. When we come back from the news break, new developments on Hillary Clinton's email scandal. There's another scandal exploding involving her brother and political corruption. The Clinton family's been hit with a RICO lawsuit in Florida. It's just piling up on them. And they're very unhappy that you are learning about all of this from the independent media. Because without that, you'd still be told that Bill Clinton is wonderful and Hillary's wonderful and she supports women and all the rest of that other stuff. And anybody who's opposed to Hillary being president, that's just because they hate women. I love women. Especially my wife. It's Hillary's behavior I have an issue with. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And we're going to start off talking about computer issues and primarily Hillary Clinton's classified emails, because we now know that she was using an outside company owned by McAfee as a spam blocker for her email server, and that meant the emails were visible in the clear to the employees of this outside company who do not have the necessary security clearances to be looking at that material. Now, Bloomberg is out there saying it's highly questionable that Hillary's Benghazi emails just happened to be sent exclusively on her personal accounts. So, now then, Larry Klayman, who used to be involved in Washington, D.C. with one of the public interest groups that's now trying to get the information about Benghazi, is now down in Florida with another organization, and he's filed a lawsuit before the District Court for the Southern District of Florida, alleging that the Clintons and their foundation have committed criminal violations under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. That basically their supposed nonprofit foundation is actually a for-profit mechanism to make themselves insanely rich. And a lot of people are very concerned over the amount of money poured into this foundation from foreign governments and foreign oligarchs at a time when Hillary Clinton was shaping U.S. foreign policy, and how some of that money may wind up, one way or the other, being part of her 2016 campaign war chest. It's like they're not even bothering to try and hide the corruption any longer. Now, here's a story that's a bit alarming, and it's talking about all these spy agencies who are not just reading all of your emails, they are starting to block them. And I think I've seen a little bit of that here as well, because I'll get emails saying, why didn't you respond to the email I sent you last Tuesday? And I'll go back and I'll look through received emails, and I never got it. And I've had the same thing where I'll send emails to other people, and then I'll follow up on a text message, and no, they never got it. And, China's blocking Gmail for its citizens. Yahoo was caught blocking emails relating to the Occupy protests. And worse, there is now software that is being used to frame political activists by creating phony messages from that person. And 35 countries now use that same software. So they can say, oh, well, you're a terror suspect because you sent an email advocating for the bombing of the Consolidated Lint corporate offices. I never sent that. The computer wouldn't lie. Yeah, computers do lie. Remember that Sandra Bullock movie, The Net? Was one of the first to come on out there and say that, the people who are in charge of the security of the Internet can be the biggest crooks of all. And we're certainly seeing that with this kind of behavior. So if you get an email from me and it contains a bunch of profanity or porn or a bunch of other stuff like that, it's not from me. It's from the NSA. Alrighty, another story coming out of FARS News talking about the U.S. torture program. A terrifying reality that cannot go unpunished, and they're absolutely right. By the way, Tom in our control room says his brother currently lives in China and says it's not that hard to get on Gmail. Officially it's banned, but there are workarounds. The great Silicon Wall of China apparently is full of holes. And that's a lesson to everybody. These governments that want to put up these filters, there are ways around them. So we're talking about this article out of FARS News, the U.S. torture program. And it's saying it's time to recognize these are war crimes that were being committed. Especially in Abu Ghraib, where Iraqi captives were tortured to death to find nuclear weapons that didn't exist. For all you Kafka fans out there. And torture is a war crime being committed by the U.S. government over and over and over again. So is aggressive war. So are drone strikes into countries with which we're not at war. And I know Americans don't want to have to face up to this reality, but as we hit the doorstep into big mistake number 3, we're the bad guys. The U.S. government is the aggressor. And they're engaging in all the things that we were taught to condemn in other aggressors, whether it was Nazi Germany or former Soviet Union, or Pol Pot in Cambodia, mass surveillance, extrajudicial execution of American citizens, torture, concentration camps. How much lower does this nation have to go before the American people wake up and realize how low it has become? Now, getting on to gun rights here, the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center has gone public saying that the U.S. FBI intentionally distorted statistics on gun shooting in the country in order to support President Obama's agenda to ban guns for the American people. All of which, of course, is prevented by the Second Amendment. And they're trying to find some way to weasel around that. Oh, we're not banning guns. We're just going to ban the ammunition. You can have all the guns you want. You just can't get bullets for them. Well, that's an infringement, banning the ammunition. Now, I hope, rather, that the coming revolution in this country will not be fought with firearms, because the wrong people always get killed in these things. This revolution is being fought, and at the moment won, with keyboards and information. The U.S. federal government has spent a huge amount of money and preparation to fight the previous form of revolution, and that's why they were caught off guard with it going virtual. They're trying to catch up on that right now, and as a matter of fact, the more people are looking at the new FCC net neutrality ruling, which is being sold as protecting the little guy, and they're realizing, no, it doesn't, and the lawsuits are beginning to pile up. And there's an umbrella organization for telecommunications company, U.S. Telecom, and they filed a lawsuit saying these rules are arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion. They're saying that the new net neutrality rules break federal and local laws and violate the Constitution and the 1934 Communications Act. Now, I would be in favor of an enforcement of the basic principle of net neutrality, but most of that 300-page document doesn't really talk about that. And we know we cannot trust this government to regulate anything without it becoming corrupted for the benefit of the large corporations, because that is the model of government we live under right now. It's called fascism. New law being considered down in Florida would ban online video anonymity, and basically saying that anybody who posts any content to the net must include their true and correct name, their physical address, and email or telephone number on the page. Now, at first glance, I wouldn't really have an issue with that. The problem is when you post somebody's physical address, you open up the door to potential harassment. And we've been through enough of that here at whatreallyhappened.com for that to be a concern. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Janet in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I want to make a statement and then I'll pose my question to you because I'd like to see what your take is on this. The BRICS nations, which many of the people that listen to you know is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and other nations, people now are looking at them as the savior for the masses. I have been one of those people. But lately, when I go on the internet and I just Google China and the BRICS, I get a lot of information about the fact that this is all part of David Rockefeller's agenda for the New World Order. And when I go through page after page after page, I don't know. I think people need to pay attention to this. I don't know how you feel.
Well, it sounds to me like it's just another attempt to demonize BRICS in the online community because obviously David Rockefeller is one of the owners of the Federal Reserve, and the people pushing for a new world order, they don't want China's currency to be dominant. They don't want anything to be dominant. What they want is to be able to impose a single global currency on the entire world. And each of the private central banks want it to be their currency, the dollar, the euro, and so forth. So I really don't see a motive for Rockefeller to be setting up BRICS. BRICS seems to be a natural outgrowth of the U.S. government using the U.S. dollar for foreign policy purposes by weaponizing it, weaponizing the SWIFT system. And so it was inevitable all these other countries would say, well, look, we're at a disadvantage as long as we're dependent on the U.S.-centric economic and currency system. So obviously for our own self-preservation and prosperity, you know, we need to be going on out and creating a parallel system. And that's what we're seeing with all of these different parallel systems, whether it's BRICS, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, or even just all these direct currency swap treaties that China is signing with countries all over the world here. So I'm sure Rockefeller is looking at it in terms of his being able to game the system for more wealth, but I don't think he's really behind China's economy doing what it's doing. I think China is doing what is in its own best interest and those of its population to be doing right now.
You know, Michael, I hope you're right on this. I really do, because, you know, I've followed along with what the BRICS are doing. Do you have any opinion at all about the LaRoche Pact, which is pushing for the United States to become part of the BRICS, which I don't see happening anytime soon, but...
Well, I wouldn't.
Are you aware of anything?
I wouldn't be too sure about that. I wouldn't be too sure about that because we've already seen the United States, which had been opposing the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and telling all of their allies, you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it. Now they're all in there. Right. Now the U.S., the IMF and the U.S. are now saying, all right, we're going to have to work with these people. And so at some point, I would say that I think America's financial elites have realized the dollar is not going to be the global trade and banking currency any longer, and out of their own sense of self-interest, they're going to say, all right, let's do business with the systems that are out there. And so I would not rule out the United States signing on to BRICS at some point in the near future.
You just mentioned the IMF and something else. I can't remember what you said. The IMF and
the U.S.
I don't know.
The U.S. government is now saying they're going to be working with this new Asian investment bank.
And I'm aware of that, but I see the IMF, the central banks, I see them all as enemies of the people, don't you?
Yeah, and I think what they're doing is they're realizing they're going to lose an adversarial position with these alternative economic systems, and the strategy now is to basically cooperate with them and try and subvert them from within, and that is a very real danger. But I think because they're not in control of the top tier of these systems, it's going to be a lot harder for them to play those games.
You know, Michael, I hope you're right. That's all I can say. I am so sick of everything that's been going on. I've lived for a long time, and I've never seen such crap that goes on. I am sick of it. I'm tired of all of these people. And, excuse me, but I refuse to call any of these people elites. They are financial terrorists to a man and a woman. That's all.
I agree with you. I simply use the word elite because that's how they like to see themselves. But you're right.
Yeah.
All of these, you know, whether it's a LIBOR scandal, rigging the unemployment numbers, rigging the stock market, rigging gold and silver, all of these giant financial centers, the too big to fail, too big to jail, they are giant criminal fraud enterprises. Our government won't do anything about it. The best that we can do is to educate the American people that, yes, all of these financial systems are preying on the American people, siphoning off their wealth, and returning nothing of substantive value to our culture and our society and our nation in exchange for it.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. All right, getting on back to the world of computers, and the news is not good. And by the way, for those of you who have been noting the problems with our current website, we are starting to migrate to Drupal 8. SiteGround has informed me it's impossible to take my server back to what it was when it was still all working properly because this is mandated and that's mandated. And, you know, it's all about forcing us to spend huge amounts of time upgrading software. But I'm starting the process. I don't have an estimated date of switchover because Drupal 8 is admitted not ready for an actual online production site. But I'm starting the process of building the new site right now, and we'll try and get that settled just as soon as we can. Meanwhile, apparently about half of Android devices are now vulnerable to an attack that can replace a legitimate app with a malware version that can collect sensitive data from the phone. And they're saying Google, Samsung, and Amazon have already released patches for their devices. I got to make sure Claire is updated. But 49.5% of Android users are still vulnerable, according to Palo Alto Networks, which discovered the problem here. Now, I don't know about you. I don't keep sensitive information on my smartphone. Text, email, phone calls, GPS, you know, web browser, and that's about it. I don't have banking data on there. I don't have credit card data on there. We do not set up our bank accounts for electronic transfer over the web for those very good reasons. Now, apparently 4 years ago, Adobe applied a patch to their Flash code, supposedly to block attackers from stealing information. And apparently LinkedIn and minded security researchers are saying this patch actually didn't work. It absolutely didn't work. It was a complete botch-up. And it's for that reason that I no longer use Flash on any of my websites. And I understand that YouTube and some of the advertisers use the Flash player, but we don't have Flash code actually at the What Really Happened website because it is a huge security nightmare. It really is. Now then, story out of Torrent Freak. Music group wants ISPs to spy on customers to stop piracy, including, basically proactively blocking infringing websites. Now, obviously, copyrights need to be protected. And what is really annoying is it is these content thieves who have created the legal justification for the U.S. government to crack down on the Internet as a whole, which makes me wonder if these content thieves are not themselves actually working for the government to create that political crisis for the government to solve. It's the Hegelian dialectic, which means the government sets your house on fire and then offers to sell you a fire extinguisher. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about computer technology here. We're talking about all these problems that are out there. And, just find just one of these cyber criminals and crucify them live on national TV. It'll take them about 4 to 5 days to die if they're reasonably healthy. And I'm sure a lot of this hacking activity is going to go away, except, of course, that hacking activity that's subsidized by the United States government via the National Security Agency and Equation Group, which is pretty much now established to be part of the National Security Agency. They're the biggest cyber criminals out there. Now, there's a term for people who are really dedicated hobbyists in electronic devices called jailbreaking. And what that means is getting past the wall that smartphone and tablet companies put up so that you can't look at what's going on inside your own device, because they know you'll start rooting around trying to find all that NSA spyware. And apparently, a recent firmware update by Amazon to the Kindle specifically disables any devices that it thinks have been jailbroken. Instantly turns them into bricks. And when I was a kid, I remember the good old days when you bought something, you were its owner. And you could do whatever you wanted with it, and if you wrecked it, it was your own fault. You could modify your car and put headers and carburetors on it. You could go on in and tweak the TV set, tweak the radio, so it worked a little bit better. No more. We live in a country where what you buy is no longer considered your property. It's merely licensed to you. And the licenses require that you not go peeking around inside to see how that device is spying on you. Apparently there's another malware out there called Light Eater that infects computers through the BIOS. And apparently businesses and governments are at risk, along with home users. And it says people who do not update their BIOS are in danger. Boy, updating your BIOS, that's a high-risk activity. You can destroy your machine if the update isn't perfect. And we're all working now as field technicians for the computer companies to install the updates because they didn't do it right the first time. This trend to release buggy software, buggy hardware, and then turn us all into unpaid quality assurance inspectors for the software and hardware companies is eating into our productivity as a nation. It looks good on the stockholders report from the company. Oh, we saved a bunch of money firing all these people. We're going to let the end users find out all the problems for us. And it winds up costing our economy billions, if not trillions of dollars in lost productivity, just to make a money junkie a little bit happier. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. David in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that this whole country has turned to crap.
Yes.
It really has. I mean, I come from a law enforcement military background, and I am a patriot of my nation. But I will say this, the whole world, this country, has taken a turn from the worst. We've gone away from the Constitution. We've gone away from what this country was founded on. And we are fighting wars and stuff we have no business dealing with. But they decided to come.
May I make a request here? Instead of saying this country has gone to crap, this government has gone to crap, because the American people are still the same.
Yeah, the American people are still the same, but the government is trying to control us. The government is trying to do something to us that, okay, he's the first black American president. Okay, okay, yeah, you know what, that's fine, I'll wait. The birthday cake has already been eaten.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, because of Barack Obama, it's going to be a long, long time before another African American can seek the Oval Office. Because anybody running against him is going, oh, remember what a disaster Obama was.
Yeah, hopefully it's not going to be a dirty blonde.
Oh, man, we're shaping up to, 2016 is going to be another lesser of two evils contest, and that's still evil.
Okay, so the thing is that, the Republicans and the Democrats are, everybody says, oh, there needs to be a third party, there needs to be a third party. Okay, do you realize that a third party is going to have hell to go through to actually get something completed or done?
Of course. The system is rigged to protect the two established entrenched parties and keep the troublemakers out. The Green Party, the Ross Perot's, really, when do we get our country back? When do we get our country back? A lot of people don't realize we went to war against England because King Henry, or George III, whichever his name is. George III.
Decided to say, you know what? We're going to tax the crap out of you. Because what do you think the Boston Tea Party was? What do people think the Boston Tea Party was about?
The Boston Tea Party was about the tax and about being forced to buy their tea only from the British East India Company. And that's the reason coffee is so popular in the United States today.
And, and the thing is that I hope that the millions of listeners, hopefully there's millions of them, that are listening there right now, that realize that this country's going down the toilet. That there's millions of people out there that are tired of what's happened.
Well, I know they're out there.
I listen to Free Talk Live. I have the number, and I call from time to time to vent about this country. And you know what? I hope there are many other people out there that think the same way I do, that a tyrannical government that forces you to purchase, that forces you to do this. And, when Barack Obama went in there, oh, we're going to be the most transparent government ever. What? Liar. How big is your nose now, dude? How big is your nose now? How long is your nose
They have a plastic
grown?
surgeon on permanent staff at the White House to keep that thing whittled down.
Trust me, I wished I was the one that had the machete goes, oh, his nose has grown too long. Okay, grow it a little bit more.
Oh, you're going to get the Secret Service down on you for that one. Listen, we're almost to the commercial break here. And again,
you know what? I will tell the Secret Service, come get some.
Okay, well, be that as it may. We're going to have to stay patient. The system is tearing itself apart right now. We, the people, need to be ready to set up a new country that works for the people and the country, and not let the same carpetbaggers come on back in and start the same scams all over again to enslave future generations of Americans to private central banks. That is the top priority when we talk about the blueprint for the new America. Okay?
So.
Alrighty, so thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go. And yeah, let us always remember to keep a line drawn between the behavior of the government in Washington, D.C. and the rest of the nation, because America is still doing fine in the moral, ethical sense. It's the central federal government that is the problem. Same thing with Israel. We don't blame the Israelis for what's going on. It's the government that's doing the bad things. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today here, and we're getting some new information about the Germanwings crash. We had been hearing earlier in the day that a large number of the flight crews were refusing to fly their assigned flights today, and flights were being canceled. And Germanwings came out and said they're distraught, they're traumatized, they knew people on the plane that went down, and we're now finding out that's not the problem. Apparently, these pilots are refusing to fly on the aircraft because they are concerned that they have not been properly maintained. And apparently, this aircraft that crashed had been grounded just 24 hours earlier over multiple technical issues, including a problem with the landing gear. And so now it's beginning to look like we may be dealing with some kind of a major malfunction in the aircraft itself. Now, in defense of Airbus, they build a good, solid product. I've flown Airbus many times. I'm very impressed with them. But the upkeep and maintenance of that aircraft is in the hands of the airline that is running it. And airlines, especially the budget airlines, like to cut corners. And so the reason these pilots are now refusing to fly this aircraft is not because they're traumatized by the crash, but because it hammered home the point that they're running right on the ragged edge. So we'll get more developments on that a little bit later. Speaking of aircraft, it's time to whoop on my absolute least favorite military aircraft, the F-35. There's another problem that comes with it. There is a system on the F-35 called Advanced Sensor Fusion. It's sort of the airborne equivalent of Aegis CEC in that all the aircraft are accessing data from all the other aircraft and putting it together into a tactical display that the pilot can see. Unfortunately, because of poor software design, these fused tactical displays are not coming together. They're getting double vision. They're seeing the same target in multiple locations. They don't know which one is real, which one isn't. And rather than giving the F-35 a tactical advantage in the air, they've just added to the confusion of the flight crew. All righty. Coming up to the end of the show here, so of course it's time for us to talk about human-caused global warming. Story out of CBS in Boston. Another month of record cold, but reasons to be optimistic. Yeah, we're in spring. At some point it's going to warm up a little bit. Story out of the Examiner. Sleet and snow on cards for Huddersfield towards Easter. It's going to be a white Easter across a huge part of the country. Story out of weather.com. Snow coming to upper Midwest, northern plains this weekend into the start of next week. Over at the OC Register, last blast of winter, up to 15 inches of snow in the Midwest. Now, we are almost a week past the calendar start of spring, but climatologists and weather forecasters, meteorologists, don't use the calendar spring. They have what they call a meteorological seasonal calendar that breaks the year into 4 equal components. And according to that calendar that they use, spring actually began almost 4 weeks ago. Boston is confirming that the all-time seasonal snow record for that city has been broken. They got more than 100 inches of snow, and it wasn't even the heaviest. Apparently, Sault Ste. Marie got 158.7 inches, followed by Marquette at 157 inches, according to the National Weather Service. Boston was actually the 7th snowiest city in America, and they were setting records. We talked about this last week. FEMA is going to deny funds to any state that questions the divinely revealed dogma of human-caused global warming. If you deny global warming is real and that humans are to blame, you will not receive FEMA funding. Now, here's the story over at Stephen Goddard. Every year we keep hearing about, Greenland is losing its ice sheet. Greenland is losing its ice sheet. Actually, it isn't. But they'll go on out and they'll take pictures of glaciers calving off the ice sheet, dropping into the ocean, saying, see how much ice they're losing into the ocean. What they're not showing you is the snow that is falling in the middle of Greenland. Because the Greenland ice sheet is a dynamic process where the snow falls in the middle, it glaciates, and then it spreads out until it reaches the shore and falls off. Excuse me. They're using some chemical next door for the renovations that's making me sneeze. But the idea is that, yes, you're going to see ice at the edge of Greenland or the Antarctic falling off because there's new snow and ice coming from the interior. And it doesn't mean it's losing the total volume of ice and snow. It's just another piece of the propaganda. And they really are getting desperate to sell this thing because now the head of the Episcopal Church in the United States has declared climate denial to be immoral. If you challenge Al Gore, you're going to go straight to heck when you die. Good news out of Santa Barbara, that woman who was transferred to a Los Angeles hospital out of concern she might have had Ebola, tested negative, does not have Ebola. However, they have now confirmed new cases of Ebola in Liberia. And the reason they're concerned is, again, it was declared under control, gone. They don't know where the infections are coming from. But they've got a new case over there. Brazil is dealing with an epidemic of dengue fever that just propped up all over there. So they're looking at that. Let's see, 17 scientists speak out. Monsanto's Roundup is causing cancer. World Health Organization is admitting glyphosate probably causes cancer. And the problem is that 75% of air and rain samples in the United States of America contain glyphosate. So the wind and the rain are now, thanks to Monsanto, carcinogenic. But of course, this is going to stimulate the economy because Monsanto gives you cancer and then you have to go over to the hospital to get cured of it. Money, 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 money. Now, Monsanto, proving to the world that corporations and not the civil government are in charge, are demanding the World Health Organization retract their statement that there might be a connection between glyphosate and cancer. And by the way, talk about ironic timing. The movie The Constant Gardener was on cable yesterday. I got to watch a lot of TV yesterday when the internet finally came back on. And it's an amazing movie. Ralph Fiennes, and he plays this very delicate British gentleman. It's almost 180 degrees opposite his performance of Voldemort. And Rachel Weisz plays his girlfriend, and it's actually based on a true story about unauthorized testing of pharmaceuticals in Africa, covering up the deaths to declare the drug to be safe. And that's the way they operate. There's this wonderful line in the movie, you're talking about pharmaceutical companies. They're right up there with the weapons dealers in terms of the evils they unleash on the planet. Now, Monsanto's chief executive Monsanto, speaking to The Independent, is saying, well, the real problem is maybe we were a little arrogant and a little pushy, and that's the reason for the public resistance to GMO. And we made a wrong call in our presentation. Okay? Not even addressing the issue of whether GMO is safe or not. And remember, Monsanto's own cafeteria will not serve GMO food. They're out there saying that all this resistance to GMO, it's just a backlash to the fact that Monsanto was maybe a little brusque and abrupt in promoting their product. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get some animation work done, actually work on the new website. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. So until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please tell all your friends about Genesis Communication and whatreallyhappened.com. We need your help to build our audience. We need your support. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.